right, guys, let's take a look at this week's internet weather. These are the top 10 most probed ports for this past week. You can see that the top 4 slots didn't really change, but we have a newcomer in slot 5. So let's run through them. So in first place, we have port 23 TCP, that's Telnet, followed by 80 ICMP, which is ICMP ping. After that is 445 TCP, which is SMB, and then 1433 TCP, which is Microsoft SQL Server. So the newcomer this week is 123 UDP, which is the Network Time Protocol, or NTP, and we'll take a closer look at that. 443 TCP is TLS or SSL. That's moved up 1 spot, followed by 80 TCP, which is plain old HTTP. 22 TCP is SSH, it's down 3. 81 TCP is an alternate web port, sometimes associated with IoT devices. That's up 1. And in 10th place, we have 3389, which is Remote Desktop Protocol.
Yeah, I think it's notable that the more than half is others. And of course, there are lots of others that can be part of this. But, looking at the top 10 gives you, sort of a view of the landscape, but it's not a complete thing. And so folks should be kind of wary that any application that's on the internet is potentially subject to scanning activities.
That's a very good point, and in fact, we have some evidence of that in another slide later on. So the top 10 most sources probing. This is individual sources sending traffic and not the volume of traffic. You can see that the top 6 slots have not changed at all, which I think is a new thing for me. It just shows that there's significant scanning activity enough to not budge any of these over time. Going to skip over a few of these ports. 53 UDP is DNS, which we did talk about briefly. 8080 TCP is another web port. A lot of time it's a proxy. Sometimes it's another IoT device. There's a lot of stuff there. 443 is up 7 spots, which is funny because it didn't change that much in the overall traffic rankings, but it did move up a lot in the number of sources. 27032, I believe, is the Steam client, which would make a lot of sense with what Brian said earlier, that you have a lot of gamers who are currently online. And then 5555 in 10th place is the Android Remote Debug Bridge. So taking a look at 123 UDP, you can see a number of spikes in the last week or so, maxing out around 500 million scan flows per hour, which is pretty significant. And a lot of these are coming from a single VPS provider in the United States in the range of hundreds of sources. So that's 100, again, that's the single largest cluster, and not just that there are 100 or under 100, or hundreds of sources. There are thousands of sources, but the biggest single cluster is in the US. So as we talked about before, NTP is used a lot for reflective DDoS attacks, especially for its amplification factor when you have a server that has a list of the last few clients to connect to it. You can get a pretty good amplification attack off of that. And I tend to agree with Brian that the most likely thing that's going on here is that you've got folks who are gamers, who are one of the major markets for DDoS traffic. Someone's probably out there looking to build up their botnet, and as a result is looking to do this.
Yeah, actually, in most cases, the gamers aren't actually the ones building the botnets. There may be somebody, there are certainly exceptions to that, but they're actually, their services. They've monetized the notion of creating denial of service attacks, and the process around that is they have to build a botnet, and so they'll do something that compromise endpoints to be able to build that botnet. They need to find amplification sources to be able to facilitate those DDoS attacks, and I think that's what we're observing here is that they're going through anonymizing proxies to be able to hide where the bots actually are so that the botnet doesn't get taken down, but they're performing that activity looking for NTP servers. They're probably looking for a number of other servers as well, but this one just happened to show up on the radar. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, actually, Network Time Protocol does have the opportunity to, it's actually the listmon command that provides the opportunity to be able to create a large response, but a lot of the reputable network service providers that actually put controls in place to prevent those large responses from traversing in or out of the network. And the intent there is to basically damper this. It has really significantly had a positive effect on or inhibiting the use of Network Time Protocol as an amplifier. But network time protocol and the servers are all over the internet, and they're still available to be able to at least provide responses that wouldn't necessarily keep an attack service from using those. But I think that's what we're presenting. And then the client base, the customer base, in many cases are the folks that are doing competitive online gaming.
Right. No, that's a very important distinction to make. And those folks are signing in and providing a credit card and pointing at an IP address, and that's the extent of their technical knowledge in a lot of cases. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, taking a look, we had an interesting spike in the past week on port 443 TLS. The sources are from Germany and from Great Britain. I do not know what the target web service is, but typically when you see something like this, someone is looking for something specific. I mean, it's a pretty good noise floor of people scanning across the internet for 443 at all times, but I think someone is looking for a very specific vulnerability or to map out the existence of some sort of service. Unfortunately, we don't have samples of that, so I really couldn't say one way or the other what it is. And I wanted to come back to a port that we looked at last week. Last week, we actually talked a lot about port 5900 TCP, which is VNC, it's kind of like a remote desktop protocol, but a little bit different. It's actually not in the top 10 this week. It's down to the top 20, but again, still significant, as you can see from the graph. And the sources, much like last time, for that spike in the last week are from Venezuela, China, and Peru primarily. Why people would scan for this port is that you can log into a lot of boxes and have a full GUI interface to them. Some people leave these things on the internet with terrible passwords. I'm not aware of any vulnerabilities that are affecting VNC at this time, but password guessing is not out of the question.
And once you get in, you can do anything to the box you want, basically. So it's high value if you're able to get in.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there may actually be sort of a brokering activity here that one group goes out to find compromised machines and then sells them off to other groups that might be, wanting to use them for other nefarious purposes. One that clearly comes to mind is cryptocurrency mining. There have been a lot of cases where, devices that have been compromised get sold off and then used for inserting cryptocurrency mining software on them, stealing essentially CPU power from these devices. I've actually seen cases where devices have been botted, not necessarily through VNC, but botted, and I'm told that the processing associated with cryptocurrency or DDoS attacks is so intense that it literally melts down the device. That a lot of these IoT devices aren't designed to do more than just, measure something and record it, and then you turn the CPU into a high compute process function, and it actually kind of melts down the device. It can actually have physically destroy the device. So it's sort of an interesting observation there. I think one of the other things, these remote accesses through VNC or perhaps RDP, that's 3389 that showed in your top 10 list, is often a vector used for folks that are trying to do ransomware attacks. That is, a lot of times these remote accesses are set up, particularly in a COVID-19 kind of situation, to provide remote access for administration of an IT network. And if they're not secured properly, they could potentially be compromised, and that could actually result in a ransomware attack against that business, which, obviously the attacker is trying to extort money. And, kind of mapping into the story that Michael had here, the evidence of that would be, in fact, encrypted machines and the opportunity to decrypt those machines. So be careful about the ransomware attacks. It's unfortunately become more popular, one of the most popular extortion types that I've seen.
And something to add to that is that I'm only realizing now is that it's significantly less, it's a lower bar to entry if you can get onto a box that has VNC or RDP installed. Like it's basically like logging into your own machine at home. You don't have to know how to write any scripts. You don't have to know how to come up with any vulnerabilities or write exploit code. You just connect to it, and then you download a file while you're on there, and now you've got a box that has ransomware on it. So
yes, and some of the ransomware does have self-propagating capabilities. So if that particular box has permissions to be able to get to others, or perhaps an opportunity to be able to escalate those permissions to get to other machines, it could actually have a significantly devastating effect on the business.